Hello there. Throughout the UK, there were the big PTE fleets that we always associate with Leyland Atlanteans. Greater Manchester, West Yorkshire, Tyne and Wear, Liverpool and Glasgow. The last two probably a bit more because they were involved with the very early production Leyland Atlanteans. After a distinctly shaky start, Glasgow Corporation and its successors would go on to operate a further 1,448 Leyland Atlanteans. So come with me as we take a return journey back to the time when the Leyland Atlantean ruled the streets of Glasgow. Over the years there's been many claims to who had the first Leyland Atlantean in service. There are four contenders: Wallasey number 1, which was registered FHF 451, Maidstone and District DL43, which was registered 43 DKT, Glasgow FYS 998, which was numbered LA1, and James of Ammerford, which was numbered 227 and registered RTH 637. Now, of course, it was officially the James one that got him first. However, over the years, both Wallasey and Glasgow have tried to make claims on this. LA1, the Atlantean that was for Glasgow Corporation, would be the only one of the four buses that was bodied by Alexander, the rest being bodied by Metro Camel or Wayman. This had a slightly more curvaceous bodywork than the others. It also had the first bodywork to be completed at Alexander's new factory in Falkirk. LA1 was a PDR 1/1, PDR standing for Passenger Double-Decker Rear-Engined. The Alexander bodywork seated 78 passengers, and it arrived in December 1958. For around 3 or 4 years, this would remain the only Atlantean in the Glasgow Corporation fleet. Now, you must remember at the time this was very much the forefront of technology, and there were two main reasons why Leyland had chosen to put the engine at the rear. One was to increase seating capacity, and the other was the driver could keep an eye on the platform and load the passengers and unload the passengers, while the conductor remained in the saloon, upstairs or downstairs, collecting the fares. There were no one-man operated double-decker buses in those days. It would be a fair few years before this was legalised. And it's safe to say it would probably be a fair few years after that the unions would agree to it. In the interim period, Glasgow Corporation continued to buy conventional front-engine double-decker buses. These being vehicles like Leyland Titan PD2s and PD3s, and Daimler CVG6s. Now, it's worth mentioning at that point Glasgow had quite a large tramway network, along with a fairly limited trolleybus network that had been introduced from 1949. Now, interestingly, aside from Blackpool, of course, Glasgow became the last city or town in the UK to operate trams. That was until the opening of Manchester Metrolink in 1992. These last trams running on the 4th of September 1962. Now, as I mentioned, Glasgow did have a very limited trolleybus operation. In 1949, 2 tram lines were converted to trolleybuses. To aid the replacement of these trams, Glasgow Corporation ordered 200 Atlanteans to enter service in the summer of 1962. Now, one of the things that had come out about the testing of LA1 and indeed the other early Atlanteans was that they weren't quite as good as Leyland had hoped. There were all sorts of problems with these early Atlanteans, including things like engines overheating, a fan shaft breaking, seals between the gearbox and angle drive failing, failures with the centrifugal clutch, and the failure of the Armstrong front shock absorbers and road springs, as well as cracks appearing in the rear framework. This led Leyland to develop the Mark II Atlantean, and this would address most, if not all, of these problems. The most obvious difference, though, to the outsider was the rear engine cowl. On the Mark I early Atlanteans, it was a one-piece cowling. On the Mark II Atlanteans and onwards, it was split into 3 pieces, with the corner panels bolted. These 200 Atlanteans that Glasgow ordered were to be of this new, improved, all-singing, all-dancing Mark II type Atlantean. In the meantime, LA1 would also be converted to Mark II standards. Now, something else set these Atlanteans aside from anything else on the road at that time, and that was the Alexander bodywork that they would be fitted with. In the early 1960s, it's safe to say that the Atlanteans tended to be a little bit boxy, and their bodywork tended to look all the same. That was until Alexander launched its A-type bodywork. Now, this was very curvaceous and made a lot of use of moulded fiberglass and curved glass. And I have done a video on this in the past, and I will endeavour to put a link in the top right hand corner, so once you've watched this video you can hop over and watch that one. One of the most striking aspects of the A-type bodywork was the curved upper deck windscreens, which was actually the rear windscreen of the Y-type single decker that had been reused to form this upper deck front window. Absolutely genius, isn't it? Another interesting thing about these Atlanteans were they were actually badged as Albion Atlanteans rather than Leyland Atlanteans. Albion being a subsidiary of Leyland and being based in Scotland. Again, these were PDR 1/1s and seated 78 passengers. Throughout the 1960s, Atlanteans continued to enter service with Glasgow Corporation. Glasgow Corporation would take 363 of these PDR 1/1 Mark II Atlanteans, which were fitted with Leyland 0600 engines. These buses also featured a semi-automatic gearbox and electric gear selector switch on the steering column. From 1967, the Atlanteans featured the more powerful 0680 engine and had a floor-mounted air gear shift, as well as a slightly modified body design with a step-free ramped floor downstairs. By 1970, the A-type bodywork had morphed into the J-type bodywork, which was the slightly wider version of the A-type, but had since become the standard type. Also from the 1970s, the new LA Leyland Atlanteans were fitted for one-man operation. LA 362, which was fitted with an automatic gearbox, was the first of Glasgow's double-decker buses which were converted. This would involve moving the cab door and the bulkhead to create more space in the cab, and fitting a periscope so the driver could view the upper deck. Although bizarrely, this was actually behind the front upstairs seats, so the driver would have no idea what was going on in the front seats upstairs. In 1972, the operations of Glasgow Corporation passed into Greater Glasgow Passenger Transport Executive. Now around this time, Glasgow decided to try dual doors on its Atlanteans. But this layout wasn't to prove very popular with the greater travelling public, and over a 5-year period, 300 of these buses were converted back to single door. Some of the dual door buses remained, and later in life they became driver training buses with the front doors panelled over and the instructor's seat in where the platform used to be. Further changes to the bodywork design would see the panoramic window design start to make an appearance in the Greater Glasgow fleet. Now, these would cause a few issues for Glasgow in the future, but when they arrived, they were absolutely stunning vehicles. Their big windows giving unrestricted views of the city. Due to the design of the bodywork, the offside windows were all out of alignment, and whether or not this played a part in the structural problems, I don't know. But we'll come back to these structural problems in a bit. In the mid-1970s, the interior specification changed slightly on some of the Atlanteans. The bodywork featured a green stitched vinyl which was slightly lighter with green pattern laminate throughout both saloons. From LA 1251 there was an improved high drive cab position. In December 1979, Greater Glasgow would receive a further batch of 40 Leyland Atlanteans, and these would be the last Atlanteans to be bought by Greater Glasgow, as well as the last Atlanteans fitted with the panoramic style bodywork. By the time of the delivery of this batch of 40 buses, the PTE was becoming aware of the deficiencies and problems associated with the panoramic windows. This would lead the last 99 of this batch, which would be delivered to Greater Glasgow, to be refitted with the shorter windows. However, at that point there were 600 panoramic-bodied Leyland Atlanteans in service in the city, and these were starting to show body weaknesses such as sagging and warping. In 1981, LA 1324 was sent to Larkfield Busworks, where the lower deck windows were rebuilt with conventional short bay windows instead of the panoramic windows in an attempt to try and support the structure and strengthen the bodywork. Other LAs 1180 and 1330 were also rebuilt like this. The PTE weren't going to be too sure exactly how well this rebuilding would work, so 1324 was loaded with sandbags to simulate carrying a full load of passengers and was driven around the city on a ghost timetable. However, these repairs and rebuilds were very expensive and very few of the panoramic buses were so treated. The other buses tended to be repaired and have strengthening of the affected areas of the chassis and body, rather than a drastic rebuild like these ones. However, the cheapest and easiest solution of all was to withdraw and sell the buses that were affected by these issues, and large numbers of the LA class between 751 and 1050 were so treated and withdrawn. In 1980, the last 99 Atlanteans for Glasgow arrived. Now these would be the ones with the shorter windows to try and combat this issue with the structural problems caused by the panoramic windows on the other batches. These also featured different destination equipment, which wasn't very well received by the Union. They also had a different interior with orange checked moquette and honeycomb and walnut effect laminates within the bus. Around this time in the early 1980s, Greater Glasgow Passenger Transport Executive was being replaced by Strathclyde Passenger Transport Executive. And out of all the Atlanteans, the LA class buses, only 10 were actually delivered to Strathclyde PTE. These last buses also featured a fully automatic transmission. Around this time, Strathclyde decided to make a rather drastic conversion on 8 of its Leyland Atlanteans. LA 850, LA 930, LA 962, LA 871, LA 979, LA 1117, LA 918 and LA 926 would be converted to single-decker configuration, where they would be renamed SA1 to SA8. Now there's comments somewhere that these actually went up to SA12, which would indicate another 4 were converted, so if you know how many actually were converted, please let me know. Now these were mostly used on the rail link shuttle service between Glasgow Central Railway Station and Queen Street Railway Station, with this reduced height meaning they could get under the height restricted entrance and exit in Queen Street Station itself. Now another reason these panoramic window Leyland Atlanteans were chosen was, as I've said previously, they suffered from a lot of structural problems, and this surgery no doubt helped the situation a little bit by taking some of the weight off of the ailing bodywork. Glasgow also had an Ailsa AV10 that was similarly treated. Between 1958 and 1981, 1,449 Leyland Atlanteans were delivered to the Glasgow fleet. On the 18th of May 1992, there was a huge fire at the Larkfield garage, and this would see many buses, including LA's, destroyed. This would result in 34 Atlanteans joining the fleet during 1992, but all of these were second-hand. The last new Atlantean to Glasgow Strathclyde, as it had become at that point, was LA 1449. Now 1449 was due to be preserved but was accidentally dispatched for scrap. So 1448, the penultimate bus, was the one that was saved for posterity. The Atlanteans lasted well into the 1990s. Now by that point, Strathclyde had passed through several owners. Originally it had been sold to a management buyout, but then Stagecoach in 1994 bought a 21.7% share of the business. Now I wonder how that was worked out. Such an odd amount, isn't it? 21.7. But in 1996, the whole lot was sold to First Bus for £110 million. Not too shabby for a day's work, is it? And this would become First Glasgow in 1998. Also in 1998, the company would operate the last Atlantean Day on the 6th of June, where it would celebrate nearly the 40-year reign of these buses in Glasgow. However, in the bus industry, things don't always go to plan, and the last Atlantean Day in June didn't actually end up to be the last Atlantean Day, with the buses soldering on until November that year. Now, many of these Glasgow buses, when they were withdrawn, went on to have further lives with other operators, including those panoramic-bodied ones that had all the structural problems. And many of these went south of the border, including London Country, who took 31 with the panoramic window bodies. These were used on routes like the 298, which ran from Clare Hall Hospital to Turnpike Lane Station, and later the 51, which ran from Orpington to Woolwich. However, these proved not to be too popular in service because they were very unreliable and also leaked dramatically when it rained. This no doubt being due to some of the structural issues caused by the panoramic windows, making the bodywork flex and allowing the water to come in. Other operators benefiting from the Glasgow Leyland Atlanteans would be First Aberdeen, who received 4 in 1997, and these would make them 17 years old. The Glasgow and Strathclyde Leyland Atlanteans have occasionally appeared on film as well. One of the better known examples being the Ken Loach film, Carla's Song, which was released in 1996. The film featured Robert Carlyle as George, a bus driver in Glasgow. But without a doubt, the main star of the film was LA 1218. Registered XUS 589S, the bus received advertising to make Glasgow a smoke-free city, and this advertising conveniently covered the Strathclyde fleet name. Happily, there's quite a few of these buses in preservation, and they're always a pleasure to see. So we've reached the end of this history on these amazing Glasgow buses. As I always say though, please remember this is just a potted history, and there's going to be things that I've missed and left out. Otherwise we could be here for 2 hours instead of half an hour or 20 minutes doing this video. If you want a more detailed history on these buses, there is a fantastic looking book, which incidentally I don't have at the moment, by Phil Hailwood, and it's called Glasgow Atlanteans, 60 Years of the LA, and I will be ordering my copy very soon, if I can find somewhere where it's in stock. I do hope you enjoyed this video. If you did enjoy it, please like and share it, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel so that you don't miss my future releases in this and my other series here on YouTube. Don't forget to comment down below with your memories on the Strathclyde and Glasgow Leyland Atlanteans. I'd be very interested to read them, as well as filling in the gaps that I've left in the story. Once again, thanks ever so much for watching. Bye for now.